Top boxing news.
So Canelo Alvarez posted this image of himself weighing in on the scales 30 days out of the rematch with Gennady Golovkin. And Canelo is noticeably smaller than he was leading up to the first fight. I mean, this guy, you know, he looks like a 154-pounder. Whereas ahead of the first fight, guy looked like a bodybuilder. Some people are choosing to explain this as Canelo is going for agility and quickness, mobility. They're saying that this is why he appears to be lighter than he was in the first fight, that he doesn't want to come in as heavy. But I'm a lot more cynical. I'm a lot more cynical than that because I didn't forget that this guy just tested positive for a fat burner that allows you to retain muscle. It allows you to burn fat while simultaneously retaining muscle. Coincidence? I don't think so. I also don't think that it's a coincidence that, well, ahead of the first fight, Canelo Alvarez wasn't enrolled in the clean boxing program. He only recently enrolled in the clean boxing program, you understand. Whereas before, he wasn't enrolled at all.
Wonder why?
Am I supposed to believe that that's a coincidence along with the fact that all of a sudden, his physique appears to be noticeably different, noticeably smaller than it was in the first fight? I mean, now, all of a sudden, now that this guy's in the clean boxing program, he shrinks. And you guys out there, you guys don't find that the least bit curious or the least bit alarming? That now that he's been busted for using a fat burner that allows you to retain muscle, and now that he's enrolled in the clean boxing program, now all of a sudden he shrinks. And you guys don't find that the least bit odd? Well, let's put it this way. You guys are free to interpret this shit however the fuck you want. Just like I'm free to interpret it however the fuck I want. And how I interpret it is, these is not coincidences. It's not a coincidence that now that you're enrolled in the clean boxing program, you're getting smaller. Because now, you don't have the assisted aid of clenbuterol. Now, you've got to burn fat to make weight the old-fashioned way. And burning fat the old-fashioned way, well, it's going to be very hard to retain muscle if you don't have the assisted aid of a performance-enhancing drug. That's why you gotta bulk, and then you gotta cut. Because trying to do both at the same time is very difficult. Where it appears that Canelo Alvarez had somehow found a way to do it. But we all know what that way was. That way was by using clenbuterol. A fat burner that allows you to retain muscle and also doubles as a bronchodilator, which could result in increased stamina. These aren't coincidences, and I don't know why anybody would believe that they were at this point. Fanaticism and fandom is the only explanation why someone would look at Canelo's physique right now and not be suspicious. Because it can't be a coincidence that, oh, well, now that you're under the hot lights and now that there's a microscope on you, you are noticeably smaller than you were in the first fight. And you guys think that's a fucking coincidence. Okay, well then there's two things going on there. Either you're fucking very naive or you're just a Canelo Alvarez sycophant and you don't really care what he does because you just want to lick his ass anyway. It's one or the other or probably both. But either way, I'm looking at this guy. I'm looking at this guy and I say, you know what? I'm trying to be unbiased. I'm trying to call it right down the middle. I'm trying to be as objective as possible so that I can get the clearest picture of what's going to happen in the rematch. All I'm trying to do is forecast the outcome. Personal feelings aside, I'm just trying to forecast the outcome. But I'm going to tell you that there is too much here that cannot be ignored. And because those things can't be ignored, I'm going to tell you that I don't like Canelo Alvarez's odds to win the rematch. I don't like his odds at all. His physical condition, the fact that he's noticeably smaller, the fact that he's quickly become a social pariah in the sport of boxing. You went from being what is arguably the face of boxing, the biggest pay-per-view attraction this side of the Atlantic. You went from that to being vilified and demonized and being exposed to the boxing public. Your peers
Call you a cheater.
Are calling you a drug cheat. I mean, from the final bell in the first fight till now, Canelo Alvarez has been on the receiving end of a lot of criticism. And that's gonna have a psychological effect on a young fighter who was at one point on top of the world. That's gonna have a psychological effect on a young fighter who's very prideful, you understand? Who may believe in his heart of hearts that he's the best thing since sliced bread. That's gonna have a psychological effect to go from being so high to being so low. To having so many negative opinions by the fans, by the pundits, and by your peers hurled at you all at the same time. That you robbed Gennady Golovkin. And then you look at what followed. A positive test for a performance-enhancing drug. That shit just made it worse. If people didn't already like you because of the judges' scorecards, among other things, but if people didn't already like you, that just made them like you even less, if that's even possible. I mean, Canelo Alvarez has come under fire, and, this much criticism. You can be mentally strong, but this much criticism, it is gonna have a psychological effect on even the most mentally strong person. And this is just the psychology of the situation. If we think about the actual mechanics of the fight, the nuts and bolts, you speculate. What if Canelo Alvarez was able to perform the way that he performed in the first fight? What if that was due to the assisted aid of a performance enhancer? And what if, ahead of a rematch, he doesn't have that advantage anymore? Canelo Alvarez was known for having heavy feet and gas tank issues. That's what he was known for before the first Gennady Golovkin fight. But in the fight, he seemed to have found a solution to both of those problems. Could the solution have been clenbuterol? And if it was, ahead of a rematch, now that he may not have those advantages, could this affect his performance? Will he have the stamina that he had in the first fight? Will he have the mobility that he had in the first fight? We see his physique, so he's obviously not making the weight the same way that he did before. Because before he was making the weight, but he was still muscular. He still had a lot of musculature, whereas now he looks very thin. You've got to wonder, what's that gonna do to his stamina? What's that gonna do to his punch resistance? What's that gonna do to his power? Since he's noticeably lighter and smaller than he was in the first fight. And what does that do to his confidence levels? You understand? I mean, if we're operating on the assumption that Canelo Alvarez had an added advantage in the first fight, what does it do to his psychology knowing that ahead of a rematch, he doesn't have that advantage? So now, this is all you. It's all on you. I mean, you don't have to wonder if there's anything different about Canelo. You can see that there's something different about him. You don't have to wonder if there's anything to think about ahead of the rematch, because there's a lot to think about ahead of the rematch. That the cards came back funny and most people didn't agree with the decision, that Canelo Alvarez tested positive for a performance enhancer that would have given him a significant advantage leading up to the fight, that you're able to burn fat and retain muscle, and you also have an added stamina benefit as a result. All of these are things that will manifest in the ring, whereas ahead of a rematch, you may not have that advantage. So what's your ace in the hole now? Bear in mind that you might have had all these advantages in the first fight, and people still think you lost. So what happens when you take those advantages away, but you're approaching a rematch? If I felt that Canelo Alvarez was gonna win this rematch for one reason or another, added benefit or another, crooked judges or another, whatever. If I felt like Canelo was gonna win this rematch, I'd just fucking say it. I'd just say Canelo Alvarez is gonna win this rematch because of X, Y, and Z. But I'm looking at Canelo ahead of this rematch, and I don't feel that. I do not feel confident in Canelo Alvarez's ability through tactics, through physicality, or even intangibles. I'm not confident that Canelo Alvarez can win this rematch. And ahead of this rematch, Gennady Golovkin hasn't been quiet throughout all of this. He made some very revealing comments recently. He says Golovkin welcomes a war with Canelo. He's not a heavy puncher. And a portion of the article reads, "It's hard to remember after a year, all this time. But from what I remember, he didn't surprise me as being a heavy puncher. He's not a very heavy puncher at all," Golovkin said. And you take things with a grain of salt because people say shit. Sometimes people say shit because they're petty. Sometimes they're saying shit because they don't want to show their cards. And sometimes they're just being honest. They're just telling the truth. So you look at what he said, and then you review the fight. You go back to when Canelo Alvarez landed that monster right hand. As his back was approaching the ropes and Golovkin was coming forward, Canelo Alvarez lands a right hand that would have dropped most other fighters. And what you notice is, Golovkin took that right hand and kept coming forward. In the majority of the fight, Golovkin is still coming forward, undeterred, from the opening bell to the final bell. Golovkin's just trying to get to this guy. So when he says that Canelo wasn't even really a heavy puncher, and that was the first fight where Canelo Alvarez may have had some added advantages from a performance enhancer. You think about that was the first fight, and you didn't really seem to hurt Golovkin with what you had. And then you look at his condition ahead of the rematch, that he's smaller than he was, and that he claims that he's gonna be working from the opening bell to knock Golovkin out. You think about that and you look at him, and you cross-reference all of this. And I'm telling you, I don't get the impression, I don't get the picture that Canelo Alvarez is, I don't like his odds to win the rematch. If I did, I would just say that. But looking at all of this, I don't like his odds at all. Now in other news, Guillermo Rigo released some recent statements that he is no longer with Rock Nation, he is no longer with Caribe, and he aims to work with Luis de Cubas Jr. and aims to be more active. Guillermo Rigo was quoted as saying that he's a man who keeps his boxers active, and in the final stage of his career, that's what he needs. That they haven't exchanged many words because he's a busy man, but they're working on things, they're readjusting things, and that they're not wasting any time looking back, rather they're, looking forward with a lot of optimism. And, this is what I'm gonna say.
In light of this news,
I wanted, or at least I hoped, when I heard the rumors that Guillermo Rigo is currently a free agent, I had hoped that maybe he'd go over there with Matchroom USA, with Eddie Hearn, because, quite honestly, he's got the fight dates. He's got the fight dates, and he's got the big cards. The kind of big cards that would give a lot of people the opportunity to see Guillermo Rigo. It's not just keeping the guy active, it's also allowing him to participate in interesting cards for interesting fights. Interesting fights that garner a lot of viewership. That way, you're getting that much more exposure. Whereas, hearing this, that he's in talks for Luis de Cubas Jr., I gotta tell you, I didn't like what Luis de Cubas Jr. has been doing the last couple of years with Erislandy Lara. I mean, the most relevant thing that Erislandy Lara has done in recent memory was lose to Jarrett Hurd. But before that, what was Lara doing? Who was he fighting? Yuri Foreman? Terrell Gachet? 2 years ago, he has a rematch with Vanez Martirosyan. Lara was, for the most part, yes, he was fighting, and that is a plus, that at least he was active. He wasn't participating in very many interesting fights, but he was fighting. That's the upside, but the downside was those fights, and some of those cards, they really didn't get a lot of attention, so the exposure, he still wasn't really getting, as much of it as he could have. Whereas, if it were Guillermo Rigo going over there to Matchroom USA, you could almost guarantee that a lot of people are going to get to see him. Whereas with Luis de Cubas Jr., I don't really feel like Luis can work that many miracles for Guillermo Rigo. Guillermo Rigo, for what it's worth, he's still one of the most skilled fighters out there. But he just doesn't have a very fan-friendly style. That's been one thing that's plagued him, and yet another thing that's plagued him is the level of inactivity. And that's a lot for Luis de Cubas Jr. to have to work with. Whereas if it were Matchroom USA, if it were Eddie Hearn, the card itself might already be interesting, devoid of Rigo. So it's already going to grab people's attention, and Rigo will be part of that. You see what I'm saying? So I don't really know. It's not about throwing shade at Luis de Cubas Jr. It's just, I see that Hearn has more avenues to push his fighters. I mean, look at how active he's kept Dylan White, and look at how Dylan White has stayed in the media. The same applies to Katie Taylor. She's been very active. She's been very busy, and big things have been happening for her. You look at a lot of the fighters that he's had so far, and these fighters, for the most part, they are on the up and up. You look at Daniel Jacobs. He's in position to fight for the vacant IBF title against Sergey Didivianchenko in the fall. And you look at just what's going on with a lot of Matchroom's guys, and big things really are happening for these guys. And these guys, they have been busy. Since signing with Matchroom, you've seen more of Daniel Jacobs. And, it's like I said, it's not just him. Hearn's fighters are busy, they're talked about, and they're active. And I feel, because there were rumors that Rigo might go with Matchroom. There were rumors, but now we know that those rumors are unsubstantiated. But I felt like that would have been a really good fit for him, because they've got the dates, they've got the budget, they've got the platform. So in light of this news, I just wish Rigo nothing but the best. I hope that Luis de Cubas Jr. can, do some things for him, that it can all work out. I feel like Matchroom would have been a better fit, but you know what? It is what it is.